Ready to go?
Yep.
Okay. Uh, Good evening, everybody, and thank you for joining us again for another meeting of the Forest Drive Eastport Sector Study Task Force. Um, and let me just make sure. Okay. Uh, the primary agenda today, and unless people have additions, we're in the process, as you know, of trying to develop the beginnings, anyway, of a narrative report with probably an optimistic goal of getting this in a relatively final form by the end of October. That's kind of a timeline we talked about. It's not hard and fast, but if we're going to go past October, we're going to need to get an extension under the terms of the resolution, since the resolution expires essentially in October. I am told uh, by members of the city council, there will not be any problem to extend this, but in the interest of setting goals for ourselves and kind of pulling this together, I'd like to see how far we can get by the end of October. Briefly, where we are now, at the last meeting about almost 3 weeks ago, we reviewed what we were calling the matrix, where people had an opportunity to indicate agreement, disagreement with certain positions, questions, issues as they were teased out of the group reports. Okay, so what came out of the groups wound up in the matrix, and the matrix was then the subject of comment, either agree, disagree, abstain, or ask for information. In addition to that, some members essentially added either corollary issues or inserted an issue, and we'll talk about that. But the matrix represented all of the issues that we had identified so far. There was some redundancy across groups. And what I had tried to do since we met last was to take all of that, look at all the comments and not report the comments so much, but to start to put this in some narrative form. And that was distributed to all of you, and it's now on the Google Drive. I apologize for getting this to you. I think I got it to you maybe yesterday. And hopefully you've had at least some time to look at this. And I apologize for just getting it to you a day in advance, but frankly, this represents about 5 hours of work, okay? Trying to go back and forth between different documents, working with red line documents, and trying to discern how we can start to put this in a narrative form. There's very little editing here, so it doesn't flow well in some parts. I tried to take, I wanted to make sure that we preserved the intent of what people were saying, both from the groups and in the comments. Where we are is we have this draft. And I see, Claire, you went, and thank you for this. I see a number of comments as I go through the document on Google Drive from Claire, both questions and comments on this draft. I don't know if anybody else has had an opportunity to do that, and I don't expect that many people have had. Okay, let's face it. And it's not going to be an exercise tonight where we kind of go and micro edit this. What I still want to make sure of, though, and I want to make sure we're we have an opportunity to discuss this. And
Bill, you're cutting out. We're not hearing you.
is the process
We have the same here. He's got a,
developing.
Somebody raised their hand. Bill.
This
Bill. Bill. Woo! I think we lost him.
he might,
Bill, you're frozen.
he's trying to say that you've all done the most best job ever.
For the person on the phone, he dropped off.
I just texted him.
Hi, Sally and everyone. The person on the phone is Michelle Verkis at State Highway.
Hello, Michelle.
Hi.
Glad you could
Hi,
join us.
Michelle.
Has Bill dropped off the video as well? I can't hear him on the line.
Yes.
I
No
don't-
one can.
We don't see him. He's not showing up right now. I'm assuming he's going to try to go get back in.
While we have a brief pause, can I pipe up from the county side and say today we released our draft of the general development plan update. So if you all want to have a look at that, aacounty.org/plan 2040, that's our full draft as it stands now. Quick
Yep, I got
little
an email on that
pitch.
today.
Yes, I saw the email too. Thank you.
Yeah.
Since the chair is out, does the vice chair want to continue this meeting or should we just wait?
Is Lily on? I don't see her.
Camille, I did forward that 2040 plan to you along with the county executive's
Yeah.
press release today. So
Yes, I did get that. Thank you.
good, good.
I don't see Lily on the list of participants unless I'm missing something.
So did anyone else have a chance
She's
to
not on.
review the document?
I have to admit, getting in this yesterday, I have been in training for the last 2 weeks where my life is not my own. So I haven't been able to look at this at all. I intend to do that, but I have not been able to.
This is Ben Sale from the Planning Commission. I've had a chance to look at both the CBA document and the draft narrative. I think for 5 hours of work, I got to hand it to them. It's a pretty good shell to start from and move around, as well as some good stuff filled in there. And notable, the CBAs tonight, I figured that'd be a good sized topic to talk about, community business agreements between developers and
The
the
benefit
residents of the community. And I think
of community benefit.
when I read that, I really like it. I don't know about everybody else, but that seems to be something that takes a lot of the work, pre-work off the hands of commissioners worry on the planning commission by, you can see an agreement from the community that already has a worked out plan of benefits to benefit the community and the comments in there. And I know that we already have a lot of venues for the community to make input to these developments. So we have a lot of meetings and we rely on the developers and the planning and zoning staff to bring us stuff. But when you have something that's basically a signed off agreement, it makes you feel a lot better that the community's on a more level playing field with that developer. So I just want to say that the draft narrative and the CBA agreements, really good stuff to read so far, but there's still a lot that can be input into the draft narrative. So anybody else have comments on the CBAs or the draft?
Well, Ben, the one thing that I know is that we as a task force didn't really get to delve into the nitty gritty of what community benefit agreements were. So Oh, I see Bill. Bill's back.
The document that's attached, when Bill Reichert sent out the draft narrative a day ago, it
Yeah,
gives a nice write-up on what CBAs are.
yeah,
And,
I got that. I have that. It's just that we as a task force haven't really gone through it and discussed it. It seems
right.
like everybody voted for it anyway, even though, we hadn't really talked about it. Same with the peninsula principles. We didn't really discuss it as a task force, but I think everybody voted yes in more or less adopting them or using them as guidelines.
Yeah, Camille, if I could address both those issues, and thanks, Ben, for bringing this up. I missed about 3 or 4 minutes of this.
did you hear where I said you did a great job in 5 hours?
Yeah.
That data you provided?
No, I didn't hear that, but thank you for saying it. That's right. Camille's point is well taken, and it is absolutely correct. I think as we moved along, we referenced 2 things. We talked about the Peninsula Agreement, the Peninsula Principles, without really an in-depth discussion about that. I think, though, we have circulated to everybody what they are. There is a write-up about the Peninsula Principles that's been available for some time, but I agree, at least implicitly, with Camille in the sense that this warrants task force consideration and a unanimous vote, or whatever our vote is going to be, or whatever our consensus is going to be, that this is a recommendation. If it's going to be our recommendation, we need to talk about it. We need to affirm that among ourselves.
I guess we're making the assumption that if people voted yes, they actually read the documents. And, that scares me a little bit because, we don't know if they really did or not, but that's the assumption that we're going to have to make, I guess.
I think it's a fair assumption, Camille. I mean, people had the option of saying, I need more information, if they thought in good faith they did need more information. So I think it is a fair position to take that if you put agreed, we're not going to ask you if you actually read the document you agreed to. Okay.
Yeah.
So we're going to assume you did. Let me just mention briefly, by way of sharing information and bringing people up to speed on the idea of community benefit agreements. First of all, trying to pull a couple of things together. The genesis of the document that Ben's referencing, that went out to members of the Planning Commission, the City Council, and a number, Sally got a copy yesterday. It went out to a number of the mayor, other stakeholders, and also elected officials in the county. And you have it now. You received it by email yesterday, and it was posted to the Google Drive folder. A little bit of history about that, and just, how come 2 groups are talking about this kind of in parallel. The idea is not a new one, but a group called the Greater Annapolis Coalition of Civic Associations and Community Organizations, which are described in that document and are co-signatories on the document, tried to put it together a proposal for the use of this mechanism in the city of Annapolis. And we wanted to get the ball rolling by doing some research, putting out a general definition, answering some of the very basic questions of what do we have in mind, generally how would it work. This is not a nuts and bolts document. It doesn't tell you exactly how these negotiating groups in the community would be formed, but the bottom line is, and the way to think about this, it is a mechanism. It's been employed in various forms in other parts of the country. And whatever we do about this, however we mold it, or if we mold it here in Annapolis, it'll be unique to us, at least in my opinion. We're not grafting something from another city and putting that into Annapolis or suggesting that. Also, we're going to take advantage of the fact that some places and some community organizations, most notably the Greater Parole Community Association, has a demonstrated history, at least in a protocol that was relatively successful for them in doing two things. One, communicating directly with the city and with the developers, and at the same time keeping citizens in their community informed and engaged, which is really what we're trying to do here. 2 years ago,
Uh-oh,
Yeah.
it's happening.
Bill, you're
again.
frozen.
Can't hear you.
people were successful and the city council passed.
Bill, you're frozen. You're back again. You're frozen.
Can't hear you. You must be having some internet issues.
Yeah. Can't hear you. Can't hear you.
Okay, he dropped off now.
So while we're waiting for him to rejoin, well, looks like he's coming back in right away.
It's coming back.
I'm going to recommend to him, if he calls in from his cell phone instead of doing video from the computer, he'll be consistent because it'll be a cell phone signal. So, Bill, are you back on? Well, whoever first talks to him, please recommend that.
This is Debbie. I just sent him a text to suggest that it was a good idea. Yeah.
Thank you very much, Deb. And now's a good time for anyone to catch up by reading their draft narrative.
That's what I'm gonna do.
And if there's anyone on the line that has any other comments about it, now's a time to chime in.
This is Chris. I came in a little bit late, but I did read everything that he put out via email.
That's great, Chris. Were there any questions or issues that stood out for you?
No, I think it's a good document. It's fairly straightforward, but it probably needs a little bit more fleshing out. And I assume that's what we're talking about tonight.
Yeah, there should be some additions and whatnot, and I would highly recommend, and I would guess that the logical flow in the future is we would go through each part of this document, one paragraph at a time, and talk about it, and that, as you say, fleshing it out, and that would be highly useful, I would think, for a couple of items. And most important to me is those CBAs, those community benefit agreements, and tracking down the flow of that from when you would start at the community level with the developer and then going through and seeing what the legal power is for those documents. Because I'm wondering, how much power are they going to carry? Are they going to be shalls or they're going to be shoulds? And how much they will limit things in the future going down the road. So I wouldn't want to see a CBA be signed by a community developer and then down the road just get completely thrown out without good reason. So we'd have to build the language and the legal legislative language to where it's solid, but also if it had to be modifiable by the city council or something later down the road, that it could be with community agreement and another meeting or so under the belt. So that's
Yeah,
just
the research I found on those, Ben, was that the main problem with them is that they're not enforceable unless they're written the right way and have the right stakeholders at the table. I think that is a good question of how they would be enforced, because I don't see how like planning and zoning could enforce it depending on some of the conditions. I mean, some of the conditions we can, but some of the, like, what if the condition is 10% of your job hires have to be local? Like, how would we couldn't, I wouldn't even know how to enforce that. That's not something we do. We would need like another staff person just for community benefits enforcement. Also, like the only ones I've seen too are when there's a large public contribution to a project, which I'm not sure why, if that has anything to do with the agreement or not. I don't see why it has to, but that's just, I don't see any other examples where it's not like some major public investment project for the CBA.
I agree that they're not legally enforceable as they are today and the way it's contained in the document. But perhaps that's one of the recommendations we make, is that we get legislation approved that when it's submitted, that CBA, when submitted as part of the planning request for permitting, that's when it would be enforceable.
But who would enforce like the, the percent of job hires? Or, I mean, there's certain things that are definitely in our wheelhouse to enforce that I think would be kinds of things in there. But I think there would be things in there that I in planning and zoning would be like, I don't know how one would enforce that thing. So maybe there in the legislation, there's certain things the city can and will enforce, and certain things that it would have to be, the ones I saw, it was the community association itself who had enforcement power and could sue the developer. I don't think Bill is imagining that, but I don't know, that's just something that, the details would have to be worked out.
Well, I would assume most of the times the CBAs are going to be requirements that the citizens want that's affecting the planned development. And therefore, once the developer has signed off, he or she is agreeing to make this a self-imposed requirement as part of the permitting process. And that way it would allow your department to enforce it if they fail to comply with the specifications.
Yeah, if it's like number of units or, number of parking spaces or something like that, I
Right.
can enforce. But if it's, in 5 years from now, we're going to do such and such, and we're going to hire this many people from Annapolis and this many people from, there's just some other conditions that we wouldn't have. Our leverage is really in the project review and permitting phase. After that, we don't have as much leverage, and it would be very hard to enforce some of those contractual things that planning and zoning doesn't have experience with enforcing, nor would we have staff to, go through their bookkeeping and say, oh yeah, they have spent this percentage of funding on what they said they would. You know what I mean? So it depends on exactly what's in the agreement. So I think we could just craft the language that, what's in the agreement has to be something that is a typical thing that would be part of a plan approval for planning and zoning.
Yeah, no, I totally agree with you that the specifications need to be something that's enforceable by your department. Anything beyond that really muddies the waters, and I think that'd be something for the future.
I think when we had a conversation about this at one of the meetings, and Sally, you can correct me if I'm wrong, but I think these things were created because there were communities that were promised certain things by the developer. And then down the road, the developer got the zoning to be changed, or something changed. And so the developer didn't live up to what he had promised with the neighborhood. So by creating this type of agreement, it was more or less, holding the developer accountable to what he had initially agreed to. That's how this came about, if I'm not mistaken. But I don't know. Do you think that something like this is going to deter people from wanting to develop in Annapolis? Or do you think that, you know, is this going to be heavily weighed towards the residents? More so than, you know, the developers? Will they say, forget this, I'm not going to do it? I don't know.
This is Ben Sale again. I don't think it's going to hinder your development, because what you're talking about doing is just putting on paper with a signed agreement, something that's already has been done with communities, developer working with the community to see what they can, I guess, get away with or do to get their project through with the community's agreement. So it's something we already kind of do. And as you read the CBA document, it says that in the process, the CBA, after it's done with the developer and the community, then it comes up along with the developer's package to planning and zoning and the planning commission. And then there is where those get implemented as conditions of approval and have the binding weight reality on them, that they're binding conditions to the approval of projects based on which type of project it is and if we approve them or not with conditions. And then it moves forward with the project. So the planning commission would also have another way of adding to the bindingness of those conditions and the of it. Now, also at the planning commission, we would a second set of say, hey, whether this is legitimately enforceable as a condition or not. And if it wasn't, we're going to see that in advance. And then if there's something on there that we're like, we couldn't possibly enforce that, we would then go back to that citizens group, also talk to the developer, maybe in work sessions prior to the application being or during these meetings and require continuance until we get that solved. How that's going to be done. When you send a community agreement or to the planning commission, one would expect that all of those items should be addressed by that commission and handled with a yay or nay and feedback given. And that's the way I would handle it. And that's the way it reads mostly in that CBA document. Of course, we will iron these things out. But as Dr. Nash says, some things, if they're off the charts, they couldn't be enforced. But let's look at the positives. Look at things that could be enforced, like a condition of giving community access to a public waterfront, permission to give community use of a parking lot to help relieve issues in the neighborhood, or some of those spots in a new development, or giving community ability to use their green space on a new development property for community use as well, or some playground or something like that. These things can add benefits to the community, and they are enforceable as conditions, and making sure they're done when the development's done. But there you go. That's my take at the moment.
Right, and I would say, Camille, that developers, I don't think that they would mind, as long as what they hate is when the goalposts change. As long as this is what we want, we agree to this, and that's what everyone sticks with throughout the whole process, then I think developers will be happy. It's when you have one group who wants this, oh, but now we have this other group who wants this other thing. And, so we'd have to have a very clear group who was negotiating the agreement, who, had credibility and consensus in the community that they were the right representatives to negotiate this.
Mm-hmm. Right.
Because that's something I would worry about is what if the developer signs agreement with this group, but this group is unhappy, then what happens? Who's the group, I guess?
Who's got the authority to sign such a document on behalf of the community?
Oh, it's in that CBA document. It gives recommendations for what are approved, or recommendations for what kind of people or entities would be a part of that group. And you're absolutely right that that's got to be laid out, because you're talking about somebody who's going to a group of people that will talk for many, and it's going to be community business associations, things like that, community associations. But that's going to be the hard thing for us to flesh out perfectly, in my opinion.
Mm.
The other thing is too, once you have an investigation, you have enforcement, then you get to the penalty phase. What's the penalty?
Yes.
And sometimes that can be awfully difficult as well.
You're reading my mind.
In the evolution of this, I'm a little hesitant to talk because I'll go off into the ozone again, but
You can call it on your cell phone and it would be 100%.
yeah,
And use the computer if you like.
I think I got it. Thank you though, Ben. just real quickly, as we move through this, it is contemplated that we're reaching out. In fact, we are reaching out now, at least on the coalition side, to developers to sit down with them and share the idea and really get some feedback on this. You know, there are benefits and issues on different levels. Some have already been mentioned, but clarity and consistency on the dialogue is a big one, you know, where people don't just go to meetings and leave and nobody remembers exactly what was said. And then months later, people say, well, they promised this, but then they say, well, we didn't really promise that. We never worked it out. You know, it's that kind of problem that I think this will help with. A couple of quick thoughts that we did think about as we developed this concept. We put this forth as essentially an agreement of intent as opposed to a legally binding contract. Okay. For a variety of reasons, not the least of which a legally binding contract creates a lot of problems. It creates disincentives to meet and negotiate. And it's just not very helpful in the beginning model. What is important is that people are clear with each other. On the issue of who speaks for the community, that's a very interesting issue. First of all, in drafting this memo, we talked about wanting to get pretty good representatives of the community stakeholders. So you see language that involves communities, community leaders, or you know, active people in the community who really know their community, business people and people from different facets of the community are participants in these negotiating groups. The negotiating groups change depending on the particular community and the development. Who picks those people? Okay, how are they picked? Well, that's still a work in progress. Okay, we're not unmindful of that. But one thing we're pretty clear about, I think, in our discussions, and that is they don't speak for everybody. Okay, so there really isn't a way easily, but well, there's no easy way at all. And in my opinion, there is no way that you can have a negotiating group participating in a CBA who signs an agreement that binds a neighbor or binds another community individual who disagrees. We can't abrogate individual rights, for example, under the city code. We just can't disenfranchise people, and that would create a lot of hassle. But the fact is, we don't need to do that, okay? I think somebody said, maybe it was Sally, maybe Ben, that the developers I've talked to about this and the people that I've talked to really are interested in clarity and consistency and joint problem solving early in the process. If that happens, it takes a momentum. And it also is a process where from the community side, you're communicating to the community all the time about this. So civic associations that are participating have a membership. And while this is going on, the membership is notified. You know, all the civic associations and community organizations that signed that memorandum have very good communication with a lot of citizens that are part of their association. So with all of that, you can't prevent somebody who doesn't agree from filing an appeal. You can't prevent it. And this doesn't cut that off, but it doesn't have to. But it's a really good part of the discussion here. This is still a work in progress. For the task force, I think our question is, do we endorse the concept? Do we endorse what we have already discussed or know about it so that it moves forward. I think that's probably our role right now.
Bill, I have one comment to make. You had indicated earlier to everyone, yes, and the Greater Parole Community Association and I have worked out a protocol with developers. But what I did when I first went on the council, I divided my ward into 13 different regions. And each one of those regions pretty much has their own smaller community association, but they recognize it's not a formal recognition, but an informal recognition that kind of the Greater Parole Community Association is basically the umbrella association for all of the smaller ones. It's not any kind of formalized agreement. It's just basically a tacit agreement. If they have individual concerns in their own communities, they try to work them out themselves. But if it's something larger, then they elicit the assistance of the Greater Parole Community Association because it has close to 500 members. So we've kind of worked that out informally. So that's another thing that we've done as well in Ward 3.
So what Rhonda does is been very inspiring to the coalition because she does have an established procedure that the community walks through with any developer that's looking at a project in her ward. And so all these other smaller communities know to go to the umbrella group and work through this established procedure. And I think that's something the other community associations really are looking to establish so that everybody looks at all of the issues at one time. Back to, I think it was Sally saying, moving the goalposts. I don't think it's as much moving the goalposts as just the inexperience of some of the communities that maybe have never had a significant development in their neighborhood and just don't even know what they should be thinking about. It hasn't happened there. So should I worry about parking or safety lighting or better sidewalks? So if we can provide and establish a framework for these CBAs, the community can get more organized and it will feel like there's more organization to the developers because they'll have looked at a framework and come in and made their own decisions as a community saying, what are we going to ask for? What should be looking at? So I really thank Rhonda for sharing the procedure she's been using that have been successful.
There's a subgroup in the coalition right now that's working on the framework, which will include what's there, how to do it, who should be approached within the communities, basically to set the groundwork for a successful negotiation that could end up in the city council and before the planning commission for a successful outcome for the developer, the city, and the community. So we're into that right now.
Bill, many community associations, the boards are not in a position to be able to speak on behalf of the community unless there has been a vote taken within the community. So that's something that we do have to keep in mind, is that you can't, a board within a community can't just randomly make a decision without checking with most of their members.
Yes, yes, a good point. But I think, again, as we work through the development of these community benefit agreement models, or the model we'd like to come up with here in Annapolis, as I said, this is a work in progress. That memorandum represents work that was done conceptually. It's a concept memorandum developed by the coalition. And as you can see in the memo, we're saying we're going to reach out. We need to sit down and have meetings with members of the Planning Commission, Dr. Nash's office, Planning and Zoning, developers, members of the City Council, and other stakeholders to form the idea. Okay, so on the issue, Camille, that you bring up, which is uh, civic association boards have
Community association boards.
Community association boards have limitations as to what positions they can take on behalf of, I guess, all their members, I think.
Yeah.
What you're reporting. And so the question becomes, how does that dovetail into how these community negotiation committees are formed? Okay,
Right.
how are they designated? Are they designated by community association boards? Are they designated by older persons from the ward? There are a lot of different mechanisms to talk about, but we'll get there. I mean, that's a procedural question, which people need a lot of input on. If I could just, and I apologize I've been on 4 Zooms today, and I don't know if my computer seems to be hanging in there. But Dr. Nash, you talked about earlier agreements that were within your jurisdiction to enforce. Was the sense I was getting from the conversation.
Right.
And using the example of, for example, agreement to hire from certain categories, if you will, or that kind of an agreement, and whether or not the city really even has any jurisdiction to sanction such an agreement on that point. I don't think it does. I mean, personally, I don't think planning and zoning has the jurisdiction to do that. But I think that in the formation of agreement, we're going to see examples that are fairly straightforward. The bike lane, the safety modifications, the contribution to recreation, those type of things, which are, water access, for example, that can be molded. Some of them are not simple because they cost money and they require consideration. For example, water access requires insurance discussions and things that developers, I'm sure, are concerned about. But that doesn't mean that there can't be an expression of intent and acknowledgement of the community desire to have local workers work on the project. I think it does matter that when a project is approved, the community voice is reflected in the approval. And in this case, it would be the voice of the community and the developer as they express their intent. And that's a perfect example of, who knows 2 years from now whether you could actually perform what you agreed to. Okay. But that doesn't stop you from talking to the community, engaging the community, listening to the community, and frankly, the community listening to the developer, listening to
I think that has a lot of value.
Yeah.
I think that definitely has a lot of value. It's just that in 5 years from now, I don't want someone to say, well, we agreed on this and planning and zoning is letting the developer not do that and blah, when it's something, so there's there's 2 things. There's that expression of community values and ideals. And I think that's a very important discussion. And then there's, things that my little planning and zoning department can make sure happen. And those are kind of 2 different things. But maybe Ben's point about sorting things out in planning commission and what goes into planning commission as conditions is a good way to say, the things that can be monitored and implemented and enforced go here. And these things are still important, still part of the conversation, but
Yeah,
And of course, that's not my idea. That's straight off of that CBA document of process and recommended.
Well, good reading, Ben.
Yeah. So, hey, it's already out there and clearly been done by other jurisdictions. So.
But I think also, Ben, your earlier point about, you know, if the community and the developer reach an agreement of intent on a certain point, and down the road there is a performance problem, you know, you can't perform, or it isn't feasible, or something happens that maybe wasn't even anticipated, we can build in a mechanism that basically has that reviewed. You know, bring the parties back together. Your point about bringing them back, you know, into a work session to talk about this, I thought was a good one, you know, and that's the kind of mechanism that I think could be built into the model to be used appropriately. Everybody's got to be reasonable with this. And we need to build reasonableness into the procedure and the expectations.
And also the initial agreement between those community members and the developer, people from the community who were important in the process should also follow that project through the planning commission and on through, because if nobody follows it, sometimes these things can fall off the radar and then they don't get implemented. I've found with other projects in the way past. So
Right. Excellent point. Yeah.
Yes.
Okay. Well, thank you for picking that up and having this discussion about that particular aspect. As to, I think Camille's point earlier about we need to discuss these things before we put them into our report from the task force. What I'm going to suggest is that in the section about mechanisms for community participation, okay, and the specific recommendation to essentially promote, I'll use that word if that's the right one, the use of community benefit agreements. I'm happy to try to do a merging of some of the language from our memorandum into this document for people's consideration.
I think that goes a long way to explaining it. And also the number one in your draft, number one is the mechanisms for meaningful citizen involvement. And number two is
Right.
the CBA. So you could just dovetail it right into that. Should be fairly easy.
Is that an acceptable way to do it? I'm just thinking, since we've got recommend use, we'll explain it, but I'm going to lift language from that concept memo into the document. Is that an acceptable way to at least start?
In my opinion, I absolutely would do that.
Yes.
Okay. I'll work on that.
Don't forget to make a citation at the end of the document for plagiarism purposes.
That's right. Do I need to hire a lawyer now or later? That's right.
Rhonda's on the horn.
Oh, that's right. There she is. Okay.
I stay in my lane.
Bill, can you represent yourself?
Worst kind of client.
Let me
Represent
go back to
yourself.
Peninsula principles for just 1 second, and maybe I missed it, but we do make a recommendation in here to adopt. In fact, we're telling the city and the county, you know, adopt these things. You know, this is a good thing. We're recommending that. Do we need, should we have a more in-depth discussion about that? Should we have more description in the draft? What are your thoughts?
Yeah, I'm still unclear as to what we mean by that and what I put need more information. I still need more information, I feel like, on that one.
So what?
And I was surprised to see that in your draft as a recommendation, because I was like, but we still, I feel like every meeting we say, we still haven't talked about peninsula principles.
No, you're right about that. So let's start that. Well, let's address it. It comes out of a group. I mean, I forget which one at this point, but and we have shared the write-up of the Peninsula Principles. Now we can do a couple of things here, I think. Step one is to read the principles, okay? And we presume everybody's can do that or will do that, that is going to participate in the discussion. Sally, beyond that, I guess what I want to ask you is, what more information or questions do you have? And I'm not trying to put you on the spot tonight, because I think you deserve more time to develop that as other people do. But what do you have in mind in terms of how we should address the question?
Well, I guess I'm not sure. Is it something that would apply everywhere in the city? Is it really something that different than what we already do? Is it, what is the goal of it? I mean, I understand the goal is that to recognize we live in a constrained geography. But beyond that, I'm not really sure what the point of it is. And I mean, we live in a constrained geography, this is true, but not, but we also have a lot of advantages that some other places don't have. So how are those trade-offs considered? I always read it and don't really know what to make of it.
I can
But
address,
I don't know what other people think.
I can address a few parts of it based on what I understand. We have water access, we have conservation, environmental issues, we have issues with development. Those are all reflected in that. I believe they're reflected in the county's new draft of Plan 2040, which I've just started to read through. So we have common things we agree on, and that, of course, well, as Bill recommends, it deserves more in-depth discussion. But there's a lot of bottom line things that apply to the city and the county in a positive way.
And can I add on to
Don't we already do all of this? I mean, what is different than what we already do? Then,
well, hold on, Sal. Here we go. In the draft outline that with regards to the Peninsula Principles from the Peninsula Coalition, made of 9 Peninsula organizations, the draft narrative says we want to do 2 things. It says, one, it recommends adopting the Peninsula Principles, and then 2, it says it recommends 3 actions, and those key actions. And now I want to make sure that the way this is written, are we really just saying we want to do these 3 actions, or are we saying we want to do 2 separate things? Adopt the principles and do these 3 actions. Can we clarify that first?
Yes, but I'm going to just say it needs clarification, Ben.
Okay.
Well, in that case, because we're just at a preliminary draft, I think it's an excellent question, and we need to resolve that question.
All right. Well, there's principles, and then there's 3 actions. So we'll go over to the 3 actions, which I can say easily here. One is establish a zoning overlay for the peninsulas. That would that's both a county and a county and a city thing, because some of the peninsula you could get. And how far up do you go? Well, there is overlays that we have. We just join those together and we could show them to this group. But I view that as the zoning districts and parcels of property that are zoned. That's what I view that as. Then there's conduct a detailed citizen-driven land use planning to support the quality of the environment and the quality of life on the peninsulas. Well, you have city and county. Most of the peninsulas are going to be on the county. And that is done through our whole planning and zoning process and things like we have here. So we kind of do that. I'm just wondering, what else are you hoping to get from that? And then the last action is to find and enforce criteria for development on peninsulas to ensure the pace of development does not outstrip the ability to achieve the first 2 goals. We also have some things in the county as well as in the city that are limiting factors and controls that do that. So maybe we point those out that we already do, or really what more do you want than we already do? So, and I guess to answer that question, the city would have to show you what we already do and lay that out in a quick couple of bullets, and then add on to it what you'd want it to do. Because some of those all three of those we kind of already do. So I'm wondering.
Lily is raising her hand. I think she wants to comment.
I think we should probably have, like Bill saying, a list of the questions that people want to discuss. And then we could prepare some responses because, for instance, the county has a more strict traffic impact analysis studies and stricter requirements for traffic impact analysis.
That's not true.
Well, I'm just reading it here.
Oh, for peninsulas. I'm sorry. Go ahead. I didn't mean to.
I mean, you want to read it. You have to look at 2 intersections, and they actually call out parts of Forest Drive in the county. There are a little stricter requirements on mitigation and levels of the intersection level of service. So we can certainly show where the differences are and where there would be a little more stringent requirements for looking at the impact of development in a peninsula setting. And Ben is absolutely right as far as how far you look on the impact of peninsula constrictions for the city. But in reality, areas that there's basically one way in and one way out is really defining the peninsulas. And we have several peninsulas within the Eastport Forest Drive sector that have all of the issues that the peninsula principles address. And I think we should have a more robust conversation about that. We could put that together for next time.
Let me see if I can pull some of this together. And it does certainly warrant more conversation and clarity. What I'm hearing from Sally and Ben is we're doing a number of things. The city does a number of things that appear to be consistent with the peninsula principles, or at least the action items that we've already put in the draft. Okay. That begs the question of, do you adopt principles that you're already doing, but you call them something else? Okay. I don't know the answer to that question, but here's my suggestion to bring this together and to remedy the, kind of merge these thoughts. Number one, it would be instructive, Sally and Ben, I guess, to give us the information as to what the city is doing that is already consistent with the action items. Okay. So you've referenced that. I think we'd all like to hear more about that. Okay, just tell us.
Yeah.
If we're already doing it, what are we doing that's consistent with what we wrote down here? Okay.
Fair enough. And also I want to say in the closing comment for it that I have no problems with the group recommending these items, because if that's what the group wants to recommend, that should be your view and should stick to it. And if the city happens to do things already, great. If they don't, then we'll change. But I don't think there's any problem with you recommending something that the city may already do. I mean, I don't see a problem with that.
Okay. And I think that in terms of, Sally's questions, which is, a further understanding of what the peninsula principles mean. I think it's a legitimate question from her office, and I think that we ought to be able to answer it. So what I'm suggesting is we may get to the point where we say we recommend that not just say adopt the principles, but be more specific. We want you to adopt these things which are consistent with the peninsula principles. I mean, I'm just playing with words here, but the idea is to pull this together so that we know what we're really talking about, and people that read this report can read it and understand what we're talking about. I mean, the fact of the matter is planning for a peninsula is different than planning in the Nevada desert, you know, I mean, it just is. And we want to be clear about why it is and what we're concerned about. Anybody else have thoughts about that?
That's funny you said that. I did a lot of flying over the Nevada desert. There ain't much out there.
You just go out from wherever the water is, I guess. I don't know.
Yeah, you can do whatever you want.
Try to find water, yeah. Anybody else want to be heard on this?
Yes.
Oh, go ahead, John.
Okay, what's planning in the city and development along Forest Drive affects the Annapolis Neck Peninsula. That's an issue that we're dealing with and we'll need to deal with the county in Plan 2040 and also in what we're doing here in the task force and also in the coalition. So it all fits together in one way or the other.
Okay. Well, for the next meeting, Sally, when is the city available for our next meeting? Do you know? It's not for another month, isn't it?
Hey, Bill, while we're looking at that, one question I had, there's a reference to the Peninsula Principles having been adopted by 9 different peninsula communities along the western shore of Chesapeake Bay. Does that mean that there is some sort of existing outlay of these principles applied elsewhere that I could at least reference since I'm relatively new
Yes.
to the conversation?
Yeah, I'm forgetting his first name. His last name is Minahan. What's his first name?
Matt.
Matt is actually the leader of this and in communication with all those 9 jurisdictions. So offline, Lily, can you provide Matt's information to Eric, please?
Yes. And the county has created a peninsula overlay in their proposed development plan that just was released. So I'll send you some of the language that they're proposing for
I have
Anne Arundel County.
Document, so I just haven't. It just came out, but I suspected that they might have some guidelines in that as well, but.
Okay, I have the next one is October 29th,
Okay.
when the city had one available.
Okay. All right.
I'm sorry. And if anything, I guess, Patrick, are you on?
Go
Yeah,
ahead.
I'm here.
Yeah. Maybe we may want to sit down, Eric, and I guess Patrick, because as it's being introduced with the GDP, just so that we could all be on the same page. That might be helpful too.
Sure. Yeah. Yeah, I would support that. Sounds like a good idea.
Okay. Anybody else want to be heard on the Peninsula Principles before we move to the next and last question? Okay. All right.
Bill, will we talk about the peninsulas and the groups that are getting together on the next meeting? Or no?
Yes, but I'm thinking we need to do it in the interim as well. Okay, so my suggestion, yeah, I mean, I don't want to wait a month to
Right.
pick up this conversation. Okay.
Yeah.
So here's what I'm thinking, asking for feedback. I'm prepared to go ahead and set up 2 interim meetings between now and October 29th as work sessions. Okay, I'm going to call them a work session. I can set it up on my account. We don't need the city's account to do that. All right. So I'm thinking, I just have to look at my calendar. I'm sorry, I can't be definitive tonight, but think 2 weeks. And then maybe we'll fit another one in depending on how we do, okay? So here's what I'm asking for to move this draft along. I will work on the community benefit agreements section, and I will put those modifications up for everybody else to have input and comment. Okay. As Claire has done, please look at the existing first narrative draft and please make your comments and suggested edits as soon as possible so that we can work on it. Okay. Look for redundancy. If you think we can eliminate anything because we already talk about it in some other section, please point that out. That's one thing I tried to eliminate. Maybe didn't get it all. But that's low-hanging fruit. Eliminate redundancy. Okay. One question I always ask is, have we forgotten anything that we did talk about that we thought was important at one point and it doesn't appear here anywhere? Okay, so I think we have it all in some form. Some of it needs to be clarified, but look for that and please make a comment about that. Okay. At the next work session, I would like to have the language and the questions related to the peninsula principles that we talked about for a minute. So Sally, if you can, and you can do it however you want to do it, whatever's easiest for you. Let's clarify those questions so we can deal with them. And we can start to deal with them in that work session. Okay. Think 2 weeks down the road here in a work session, we'll start hashing that out. All members will be notified. All members can participate in that. Okay. And if I can pull, and I don't know if I can pull Mr. Minahan in to give us a little bit of time during that session. He's been very amenable in the past. Maybe he could do that. So we'll try to put that together and put a notice out and massage dates so the majority of people can attend, hopefully. Think 2 weeks down the road. Anything else we should be doing in the work session? The work on this draft in terms of content, duplication, elimination, highlighting important points that aren't there. Everybody can be doing that together remotely right now on the draft. Ultimately, we're going to have to get a smaller group to just work with the narrative, just put it together, just do the drafting. Okay. And that may be the second work session before the next general meeting, so that by the time we meet in a month, you're looking at a much more refined draft of this report. And the last thing we would do are the annotations to the sector study and the attachments to documents that we're referencing in the report. Okay. Is that a reasonable way to progress? Anybody have different ideas or thoughts about this? I want to keep this ball rolling here. Are we okay with that? Okay. Any questions, comments, thoughts? Oh, one thing I forgot. Martha, are you still on? Nestor, are you on?
Yes, I'm on.
Okay. Nestor, are you with us? I see
I'm
you.
here.
Great. When we last talked, and I know Ramon was with us last time, You all are going to provide some language that you would like to put into this report, essentially describing your role on the task force. Remember that? Do we remember that? Or am I the only person that remembered that?
I do.
Okay, all right.
It was language to
Yeah.
say what their role was, and I guess if they, whether they would be voting or not voting or abstaining or whatever.
Yeah, or more positively, just describe your own roles. I mean, that's all. I want to put that in the report that accurately reflects what you all believe your role is and that the way you participated in this. Okay. So please.
We had a pretty significant discussion about that. And part of my suggestion was, because we want to work together with city, county, and state and projects forthcoming, but also we don't want to hamstring them and put them in a position where they have to make decisions. We want them to feel comfortable. And I'll add, it's a political, it could be a political issue as well. So just so they're comfortable with what they present and let us know what they're doing. And I know that Camille and Martha indicated that they had worked diligently on some matters that they wanted to make sure that went into the report as well. So we're looking forward to seeing the robust work that they did as well.
Great. And so what I wanted to do is ask again, please provide some language that describes what that is. Okay, because I think the report ought to reflect that.
We will.
Okay, great.
And I think Ben feels that he should be considered part of that group that's more advisory as opposed to direct involvement in the report recommendations. Right, Ben? That's kind of what I got from the emails.
That's the way it was initially taken with the legislation that I interpreted and when I was requested to be on this. So I make my input. I mean, if you want me to vote, that's fine. I just didn't want it to be seeming like a planning commissioner or the planning commission was influencing the citizens' opinion on something that the planning commission already put forth for approval, which was the Eastport sector study, Forest Drive area. So we already went over that. So for me to then go into a group that's in opposition to what was passed or put forth, and then make a vote on that would almost be seemingly, ill-advised. So that was the viewpoint on that.
Yeah.
But I'm still making my input here, whether or not you want to take it and run with it is to be debated. But seemingly you are, so happy with that.
Okay, Ben, I think, well, certainly we're very glad.
So this is Michelle at the state, and unfortunately I missed the last meeting, but we were also in that same type of support role, and we'll be providing language in line with what the county will be providing to include in the document. I think that's a good idea.
Mm-hmm.
Good. Can I have that?
Great, Michelle.
Can I have that within?
Yeah, I had sent email to, I think it was all the county, city, and state officials, just as a comfort level for you all to submit what you feel more comfortable with.
Yes.
Absolutely, and thank you for doing that.
And so can you, that group, thank you, Michelle, insert that language, okay? Can you provide that language in the draft in an appropriate place so that we can look at it, okay? So that we can start putting the pieces together. That's all I'm asking at this point, okay? And Ben, I agree with you completely on this. I think that your situation is different. Absolutely delighted you're participating, and it's very valuable here. I don't think you can vote on anything. I mean, that's my own personal view. But if you would like to submit language, you are a liaison to the Planning Commission. And it would be appropriate. I want to account for everybody who works together on this, okay, in the report. so that people reading this report recognized who participated and what role they participated and how they work together. This is very important because one of our recommendations is that some entity continue to work together and meet together and talk to each other,
Yeah.
you know, after we're gone. So, or after we stop as a task force. So I'd ask you to think about some language that you're comfortable with in that regard, okay?
Bill, we could have never, group 3, we could have never done the work that we did without Nestor and Martha and Raymond. We never could have done it. So it was really great that they were actively participating.
Yep.
Hey,
Well, that's the
Bill.
whole point of this in the first.
Bill, I have one request
Yeah,
for consideration.
go ahead, Karen.
And that is for the additional recommendations that were put in the draft report. It would be great if whoever made those recommendations would speak about them at the next meeting and allow the task force to ask questions before they're adopted.
I think that's a great idea.
Is
Uh-oh.
Bill-
Oh,
Did we lose
no.
Bill?
Oh, no. Uh,
'Cause there seemed like there were some new things in there that I'd seen before, but I didn't think we had agreed on them.
Yeah, so maybe Lily, just for the record, since you're our vice chair, do you agree with that?
Oh, absolutely.
Okay, great, thank you.
So Lily, just for clarification, are we to take the draft that was emailed out, make our changes and submit them to Bill? Or are we doing a central document and tracking changes?
I think we're trying to do a central document.
Okay,
So if you want to send them, make the changes on the Google Doc, if you want to make structural changes and you find it's better to pull the document and make kind of your own version, as long as you annotate it in the file name so that we know that it's kind of your creation, we can look at them side by side. But you know, just it's a judgment call.
okay.
What's the level editing? Sometimes on these shared documents, the editing you lose track of the document integrity because there's just so many comments. So if you feel like you'd like to pull it, make your comments, we can merge it back in. But I think we're trying to keep it as centralized as possible, if that makes sense.
Okay, thank you. I think Bill got back on, didn't he? Yeah.
Yeah, yet again, sorry, folks. Claire, did your issue get dealt with? I'm sorry. I went off when you were.
It did.
Thank
It did. We're
Okay.
going to have whoever made the additional report recommendations speak at the next meeting and allow the task force to ask questions before we adopt it.
Terrific. Okay.
Thank you.
Any other issues, questions, or thoughts before we close off for tonight?
Bill, when you went off the first time, we had a kind of a side discussion about when the final document is actually done, we probably need to go through it, you know, more or less line by line as a total group. So we have total consensus on the final report that's going to be submitted. So you might
Agreed.
want to build some time in for that because that's probably going to take a couple of sessions.
Agreed. Yeah. I think as a practical matter, we're into November, folks, but we'll do the best we can. Yeah. Listen, thank you.
I have one question.
Oh.
Camille, you said at one point your group came up with some cost estimates.
we at least did a range, a low, medium, high kind of range in the matrix. Yeah.
Can you send me a copy of those?
Yeah.
Okay, that'd be great.
Okay.
want to thank everybody, and I want to thank you from the perspective of the work that you're doing. And you remember when we started this, it was said that this is the first time citizens and government agency people on the Forest Drive corridor have ever sat down to discuss in detail some of the very common issues and very important issues. And that if we did nothing else right, sitting and talking to each other and listening to each other and learning from each other is really worth it. And I just want to tell you at this stage that you've done a phenomenal job. The people that are on this call are collaborative. They listen to each other. They do the work. And I just want to say from my perspective, that's unique. And you're to be commended. So thank you very much. And I'll see you the next time. And thank goodness this is recorded so I can listen to everybody in the meeting that I was chairing. So, okay. All right.
Thank you, Bill.
Have a good evening. Take
All
care.
right. Bye, everybody. Have a good night.